Yeah, greetings once again, and welcome you to the PSCM Mojo sessions. As you know, these sessions are held every Sunday between the hours of 6 and 8. And today, it's a pleasure again. We're going to have Brother Mandingo, and he's going to speak on the situation happening right now in Ethiopia. We have a little bit of delay with Mandingo, so we also have Brother Cecil in the studio. So while Mandingo comes on, I'll ask Brother Cecil to carry on where we left off last week, because as you know, last week we did touch on Marcus Garvey and the situation with him when Haile Selassie was here. We touched on that briefly. So what Brother Cecil will do, he'll pick that up again for us. And then while Mandingo's having a bit of technical problems while we get that sorted out. So again, thanks for everybody again for tuning into this session of the PSCM TV. It's a long-lasting thing. It's something that's been going on for many, many years. Those of you who are regular visited to the Art Center before we was locked down by Corona would know very well how these sessions go. But as we are now on social media, it's a new home for us, and it's been proven very, very successful and very popular. So, social media is something where we're here to stay. So, what I'll do now is hand you over to Elder Cecil, who will, like I'm saying, will pick up the topic and in relation to Marcus Garvey and Haile Selassie, what happened between them, while I try to bring Mandingo on. So, Elder Cecil, I will now put you on screen. So, I'll hand you over to Elder Cecil.
Thank you, Brother Taharkah. Good to be with you and with such viewers as we have worldwide, no doubt. You're right that I've come on very much to listen to and maybe comment very briefly on what our brother Mandingo has to say. But the topic is Ethiopia, and a few historical remarks before we get back to His Imperial Majesty and Marcus Garvey may be in order. Pan Africanists frequently know that Ethiopia is one of the names for the whole of the African continent. And so there's a sense in which that is what we're talking about, even if we're talking about the much smaller part of our continental ancestral land that is today called Ethiopia, and in its present format is now a very troubled place. But prior to that, it matters that Ethiopia also turns up as in ancient times God's land. Both the ancient the ancient Kemetic people, the ancient Egyptians, and indeed the ancient Greeks regarded Ethiopia in the same way. They thought of it as the land from which the most magnificent human beings in the world came from, because somehow they dwelt there with the gods. So Ethiopia has been a special place to continental Africans and to others who knew even a little bit about Africa for the longest while. And then there's another sense in which Ethiopia comes up and is important. Those viewers who know about a famous book from the 20th century called The Destruction of Black Civilization. If you go back and leaf through that, you'll find a map in there which talks about Greater Ethiopia. And Greater Ethiopia in that book includes both what we today think of as Egypt and land in between and Ethiopia. It's that grand site of a single site of ancient African civilization. And then also in the literature, people explore it properly. They will see references to something called hither Ethiopia and thither Ethiopia. And that takes us out, actually takes us out of continental Africa into the India, what they call India, and more than India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and of course the island of Sri Lanka. And that's also in the most ancient times the home of Ethiopians, and that's hither Ethiopia. And then hither Ethiopia is either the whole of continental Africa or the parts of continental Africa that we've been used in recent centuries anyway to call Ethiopia. So all of that is in the mix when the notion Ethiopia comes up. It existed long before something that is fashionable, that Rastafari had made fashionable to think about as Ethiopia, which is the land of perhaps the most ancient monarchy in the world, of which His Imperial Majesty Haile Selassie was the last manifestation. And there's a long story. A version of it turns up in the Bible. It turns up elsewhere as well in lots of different versions from the ancient so-called Middle East, where a certain Ethiopian monarch, female, goes to a certain Hebrew king, so-called Solomon, and they have a child, and this child becomes the first king of a dynasty that, with one or two breaks, but we can say continuously, has lasted in Ethiopia from that time until sometime in the 70s, when His Imperial Majesty Haile Selassie I was overthrown. So Ethiopia is this fantastic place that all of these meanings and overlays and highest points of civilization, us at Africans as our most magnificent and so on, are all part of that wonderful story. And then we know that in the 20th century, we're fond of saying that Ethiopia has never been conquered, and we're very proud of the way in which, towards the end of the 19th century, when Europeans were riding roughshod over almost the whole of Africa, that an Ethiopian emperor, Menelik, actually Menelik II, defeated the Italian forces at the famous battle, the Battle of Adwa, and kept Ethiopia independent. Of course, that rankled with the Italians, and under their fascist leader, Benito Mussolini, they conquered a number of places in Africa. Libya was one of them, and at least two places in northeastern Africa were conquered by them. And one of them was Ethiopia, extremely brutally, in the middle of the 1930s, with European liberal imperialists and allegedly democratic people looking on and not lifting a finger to do anything against this violation of what was the international organization at the time, namely the League of Nations, and that in a way is what brought the League of Nations to its knees. So all of that explains why, when in the 1930s Ethiopia was invaded by the Italians, African people worldwide, as well indeed as genuinely progressive white left-wingers, saw this as an outrage and came to the aid and support, not all that effectively, but quite dramatically. African Americans went to fight in Ethiopia with the imperial forces, and Caribbean people went. Africans from all over Africa went, and there's a really big event in our history of that time, which is actually worth knowing about. I think a book on the subject by somebody called KBS Asante, well worth looking at because it discusses part of our response as African people worldwide to what the Italians did extremely brutally, as I say, in Ethiopia. Two of the big journals from here in the UK at that time, one of them was Garvey's Black Man, and in the page of the Black Man, that encounter is actually documented. People go back to it all the time in the pages of that journal. And also Harold Moody, who was an African Caribbean man living here. His brother was an important artist, living here. And they put out a journal called The Keys. And again, in the pages of The Keys, you will find, if you go and look, and again, I'm blessed with a copy of the reissue, you will find that on a number of occasions they return to it. And then again, at that same time, Pan Africanists living in the UK as elsewhere, people like C.L.R. James and George Padmore and others came together in international organizations, usually with a left bent, but definitely also African nationalist Pan-Africanists, to lead the international fight, struggle, ideological outrage and upset and denunciation of what the Italians were doing in Ethiopia. That's mid-30s. Let's step back a little bit into the 1920s and into the early 30s, and we find ourselves in the middle of the uprising of African people worldwide. That's called the Marcus Garvey movement. Other things were happening at that time because Marcus Garvey himself was one manifestation, perhaps the major manifestation in the 20th century of what we call Pan-Africanism, certainly 20th century Pan-Africanism before the Second World War, before the Second Great European Civil War, and Garvey was strongly, obviously, oriented towards the continent of Africa. Spoke certainly from the 1914, when his organization, Universal Negro Improvement Association, was founded. Spoke from then, made references there to Ethiopia, to the way in which Ethiopia, and I haven't said this before, or not said it enough, turns up as a significant place, producing significant people in the pages of the version of the Bible that we have, mainly the King James version. So the Garvey movement, with its orientation towards Africa, inspired a whole lot of people worldwide with a rekindled love for Africa, with a rekindled love for Africanness. And it matters that we're talking about Africanness as a racial, biogenetic racial reality. And I want to say fundamentally that we Africans must not concede the nonsense that has been generated in Europe, allegedly scientifically, about race not being a biological or biogenetic reality. In fact, that's a piece of rubbish. In fact, race is a biogenetic reality, even though it is true that all of humanity is one. There are also senses, key senses, in which we're not one. And the differentiations between types of humanity, races, if you will, are relatively recent in the sense of not more than a few thousand years old, but nonetheless a reality. A few tens of thousands of years old, nevertheless a reality, and it's marked in our genetics. Skin color, hair types, facial features, and so on are genetic features of humanity which are actually fixed in our biogenetics, and it changes only in the context of racial intermixture. Miscegenation is what the relevant science may call it. So it is not true, as especially since the Second World War, Europeans have been determined, and some Africans who don't know better have taken to accepting the view that race has no biogenetic basis and is just a social construct. There's a lot of social construction going on, but it goes on either in defiance, denial of the biogenetic reality, or it goes on top of the biogenetic reality. And my approach to the reality of being of the African race, that biogenetic reality, is that on top of that biogenetic racial reality is another set of factors which we call sociocultural, culture historical, where we as the African race on the African continent and coming out of the African race in many directions have produced extremely remarkable civilization. Indeed, we in our activity in Kemet and elsewhere define the meaning of the notion civilization as being to do with cities, as being to do with the modes and modalities of culture that develop when you have the kind of surplus that arises in settled living conditions and where hierarchies of people develop and where people have time to philosophize seriously, to do religion seriously, to do the sciences seriously, and so on. All of that happened first in our part of the world, i.e. on the African continent. So the people who have swallowed the European line about race not being a biological reality have simply allowed themselves to be misled. And since we're at it, it may be as well if we spend a little time trying to understand why Europe invested in telling itself and us that lie. And the crucial reason is that Europe, which had believed in race for centuries, probably longer, but certainly since the 14th century or so, when they exploded out of their dark corner of the world and conquered and murdered in our millions all of the other beautiful people that occupy the planet who they somehow didn't like and felt themselves superior to. So they believed in race and practiced racism. And that was central to all the genocides, all the eliminations of people that they, all the enslavement, all the conquest and so on, that they engaged in. Now, a lot of that was done by them externally, although they also had a practice of doing similar things, sometimes racially based within their own corner of the world. So if you look at the relationship between, for example, Ireland and the rest of the British Isles, you will find that the people in the English, Welsh, Scottish part of the British Isles conquered, inferiorized, murdered en masse whole heap of people in the Irish part of the British Isles. So that heritage of their mass murder has to be taken into account, and they arrive in the 1930s with perhaps the nastiest manifestation of themselves arising in the part of Europe that was supposed to be their most civilized center, i.e. Germany, the era of German alleged European civilization. Everybody knows that somebody once asked Mahatma Gandhi what he thought of European civilization, and he said it would be a good idea. And it has always been true that it would have been a good idea, and it never has been a reality. So all it is an idea, and it's a very misleading idea. So in the 1930s, they turned up prepared to commit a really massive genocide. And then after the Second World War, instead of explaining to themselves and to the world what has happened, which is that having practiced their mass murder racism outside of Europe, they have turned it in on themselves.
Sorry to interrupt your flow, Elder Cecil.
No,
But
I'm
as you
happy
can
to be
see now,
interrupted.
we have Mandingo
I
on
welcome
screen.
Brother Mandingo.
Yes, Ujambo.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
I'm
now
ready to
we'll.
stand aside and hear you, my brethren.
Sorry?
I said I'm ready to stand aside and hear you and chip in afterwards.
Okay. Yes. There were some gremlins, you know.
Yeah.
Love still.
So we'll just cut over these technical hitches. So as promised, Brother Mandingo will be doing a presentation on the present situation in Ethiopia, the present unrest, after which it will be the usual format. We'll open up the floor for questions and answers, and then we'll bring back Cecil, Brother Cecil, also to make comments. So I'll just
Brother
like
Mandingo.
Yes.
Wait, Brother Mandingo, I just have to excuse myself very briefly. I'm coming straight back, and I hope I hear as much of your things, your presentation
So
as
I'll
possible.
put Brother Mandingo on screen now. So okay, Brother Mandingo, it's fine. You can start your presentation now. So I'll put you're up on screen now.
Ujambo, first and foremost, I give thanks and praises to the Almighty Creator, Ra Olodumare, Chuku, Onyami, Mwari, Mawulisa, and the many other African words that we have for the Creator in our various African languages. It is indeed a pleasure for me to be participating in PACM's Umoja, which is Kiswahili for Unity, session this Sunday, the 12th of July, 2020. Yes, my African brothers and sisters worldwide. The topic of my discussion is about the problem in Ethiopia in terms of ethnic unrest, and also the solutions for the problems of the ethnic unrest in Ethiopia, which was also known as Abyssinia. Thus, for example, in reggae music, we have the group, the Abyssinians. And in reggae music also, and rocksteady, we have a group known as the Ethiopians. So we see that Africans in Jamaica, there were two groups. One that took the name the Abyssinians, doing Sata Masagana, Declaration of Rights, and the Ethiopians, which is another word for that country in the Horn of Africa, Northeast Africa. Now, to get a full understanding, because to solve any problem, one has to be aware of the history before there can be any resolution, any solution to any problem. One has to know the background, the history. And knowing the history, then one is able to come about with solutions. The country that we call Ethiopia, also known at various stages as Abyssinia, is a place in Northeast Africa that has known civilization for hundreds of thousands of years. This is most important. Africa, our motherland, our mother continent, is a place where the first humans on planet Earth were found, came about. So we Africans were the first. 2-3 million years old. 2-3 million years old. This is way before anything about any Abraham of the Hebrews, and later on any Yeshua, Jesus Christ, Muhammad, whatever. Before any other races on planet Earth, the African race existed 2-3 million years ago. So we are the fathers and mothers of civilization and of humanity. We were the first. We don't know how other races came about, but we know how we came about as Africans. And our concern is with our African problems. The problem in Ethiopia goes back many, many centuries. Many centuries. What has happened is that at various stages, in fact, goes back for thousands of years, at various stages, what has happened in what is now known as Ethiopia, Abyssinia, is that there have been various states. There was a state by the name of Aksum, and there were other states in that region, composed of different African groups, not tribes, because we do not belong to tribes, we belong to ethnic groups or nations, who, whilst all being African, spoke different languages, and of course had dialects within these languages, etc. And as with the trail of human history, there were conflicts and there was also harmony at different stages. And this is how life amongst humans is. Sometimes there's cooperation and sometimes there's warfare. Emperor Menelik II became the king of kings, Negusa Negas, in Amharic, where he succeeded to the title of King of Kings, Emperor of Ethiopia, Abyssinia, Tirojus II, whose former name before he became emperor was Raskasa, and Ras means head in Amharic. Head is equivalent to the title of a duke and is also one who holds a rank of a field marshal, which is the highest rank in military terms. But before Emperor Menelik II became the successor to Tirojus II, Raskasa, what had happened was that on fighting against with his rivals for who should be the emperor of Ethiopia. I mean, you have had emperors before like Emperor Johannes and others and so on. was that after winning and subduing his enemies, what he did was that the children of his rivals, especially the princes, lieges, he made his rivals send their heirs to his court so that he could have them under his guard. And this was a means of control whereby any potential rival seeking to revolt or overthrow Emperor Theodosius II would not be inclined to do so because their sons were hostages at the royal court of Emperor Theodosius II. The man who later became Emperor Menelik II was one such prince who was a hostage. What happened is that a situation came about whereby the British invaded Ethiopia, saying that Emperor Theodosius II had unjustly imprisoned some British political state representatives. And the army that invaded Ethiopia was an army where the officers, led by Napier, 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 who actually was born in Sri Lanka, which was known as Ceylon, British by race, quote unquote, but he was born, just like Kipling was born, that racist poet Kipling was born in India, and others like that. He was born in Sri Lanka, which was then known as Ceylon. And his officers were British, just like him. But the rank and file, the majority of the army, and this is very important, were Indian troops, the sepoys, Sepoys. Some of you have heard of the sepoy immunity in India. So this invading force, and this is a typical example of the British divide and rule, using Indian troops to invade and do for them their dirty work in terms of imperialism against another people, even though India itself was under the British rule, imperialist rule. Now, when Emperor Theodosius II realized that the British forces were coming into Ethiopia to invade, he appealed to Menelik and the others to put aside our differences. Come and support me. Let us face the common enemy, the British. We are all Ethiopians. We are all Abyssinians. We are all Africans. The British are Europeans of another race. Whatever differences we have, let us put them aside for the moment and join with me. Let us unite to face the common enemy. What did Prince Menelik and the others do? The other races do? They deliberately refuse to come to the support of Emperor Theodosius II. Because if they had come to his support, the British and their Indian troop army would have been defeated because unity is strength. But they allowed the invading British Expeditionary Force led by Napier to pass through their territories freely. And so Emperor Theodosius II found himself besieged in Magdala. And some of you have heard of the Magdala files, etc., books that were stolen, etc. And to his credit, Raskasa, who was now Emperor Theodosius II, said that I will not be captured, taken prisoner. I will not surrender to the British. I will not be taken alive to be humiliated, to be chained. Instead, I will kill myself. And so he did. Rather than have the humiliation of being captured, put in chains, and humiliated by the British racist imperialist army, Emperor Theodosius II killed himself in his fortress of Magdala. And when the British broke in, they found that he had killed himself, and they took his son, his heir, back to Britain with them, where he was at the court of Queen Victoria. And we are several years later, because he was a very young lad, he died of ill health. You know, the climate in England was not good for this little young prince, Lidge. After that, Emperor Menelik II succeeded to the throne. And his empire, like Ethiopian empires before, were comprised of different ethnic groups, some of them who had been conquered, and so on. Menelik was formerly the Negus, the king of Shoa, and then he became the emperor in his power struggle with his rivals to become the emperor, the king of kings, the Nugusa Negas of Ethiopia. What he then did is that Emperor Menelik II made further conquests, and under his rule, Ethiopia had the largest territorial area in Ethiopian history. So he expanded the empire and made it become the empire that had the largest area, land area. Now, what happened was that the Italians had established a colony in what is known as Eritrea. Eritrea is near to Harar, which was where Haile Selassie and his father Ras Makonnen were. His father was a governor. Eritrea as an Italian colony was an artificial construct. There was no Eritrea before the Italians established, balkanized, as Kwame Nkrumah would say, because this is a feature of European imperialism, that they come and create artificial states in Africa. And this is one of the biggest problems where African unity is concerned. But that is a subject that I would have to deal with on its own another time. However, those Africans in what is now called Eritrea, this artificial state, because of the common oppression, racist oppression that they faced from the Italians, now saw themselves as one, as being a separate entity by themselves. And even though a lot of them, they spoke Tigrinya, which is the language of Tigray nearby, they saw themselves as Eritreans. So when the Italians sought to imperialize, meaning to conquer Ethiopia under the guise of Ethiopia should be a protectorate, a so-called protectorate, meaning the Italians would take care of them, you know, their foreign affairs, etc. You know, it's colonialism. Emperor Menelik II rejected this demand by the Italians under a so-called treaty that they said that he had agreed to. But it was not, because the treaty was both in Amharic and in Italian. And it's in the Italian version that the Italians were putting that clause in the treaty. Anyhow, to cut a long story short, Emperor Menelik II rejected this. However, Emperor Menelik had seen where all over the rest of Africa, the Europeans, the British, the Germans, the French, the Portuguese, Spanish, etc., that they had used force of arms, military means, violence, to conquer large parts of Africa, to enslave our people, etc. And he knew that they used the technological advantage of having guns, whilst our people in Africa had no guns, did not manufacture guns. Any guns that they had were what they got from their enemies, the Europeans, in terms of trade. But to depend on your enemy for your military defense, for your equipment, means that you are a loser, straight loser. So Emperor Menelik II started a process which did not come to fruition but he started a process that he wanted Ethiopians to make their own guns. We would make our own guns. But in the meantime, he was buying up all the latest arms from the British, the Dutch, the Germans, all the different things. And he was playing off all of these European powers against each other, because all of them coveted and wanted to conquer Ethiopia. And he was playing them off. And he knew that at any time they would try to invade Ethiopia. And he knew that the bow, the spear, and the arrow would be no match for the Gatling gun and for the rifles of the Lillian field rifles or whatever of the Europeans and the British. So when the Italians came with their army in 1896, and incidentally, 1896 is the very same year that my school, Kingston Technical High School, was established in Jamaica at Hanover Street. They were defeated decisively at the Battle of Adwa. This was in March. Battle took place over 1st of March and the 2nd of March, 1896. And because Emperor Menelik II had prepared himself militarily, he was able to defeat the Italians. But crucial to his victory was this: he remembered what he and others had done in betraying Emperor Theodosius II, in refusing to come to his help when the British had invaded, led by Napier. And so he said to his rivals, please unite with me. Let us not make the mistake that I and others made, that we made, when we refuse to come to the aid of Emperor Tewodros II. Because that was what caused the defeat of Emperor Tewodros II. And why he killed himself. Because if we had come to his help, we would have defeated the British. Please, he begged his fierce rivals, come and join us. Let us form a common front, whatever differences we have. And I know a lot of you are not pleased about me ruling your people, ruling you. But let us put those differences aside and come together as Ethiopians. And to their credit, this time, they agreed and joined forces with Emperor Menelik II. And so the Oromos, who are the largest ethnic group in Ethiopia, and this is where Shashamane is, in Ethiopia, who were known as fine cavalry, horsemen, and fierce fighters, and other ethnic groups, the Somalis, Tigrayans, and others, joined in, and they formed one united Ethiopian army. And this was why, with the aid of the guns that Emperor Menelik II had acquired skillfully from different European powers over the years, preparing for war because he knew it was coming, as Marcus Garvey Jr., my physics teacher, said, was able to defeat the Italian imperialists in 1896 at the Battle of Adwa. Later on, when Benito Mussolini, the fascist, racist, imperialist leader of Italy, wanted to take revenge, and in 1935 thereabout, invaded, sent threats before that he wanted to, because they wanted to take revenge, because so many thousands of Italians were killed at the Battle of Adwa. If my memory serves me right, 40,000 or more Italians were killed. This was unique in that at the time, warfare then, very few European armies had been defeated, and defeated so decisively by Africans. But of course, we remember the Africans of Haiti in the Caribbean, who decisively defeated the French, the Spanish, and the British. We remember Toussaint Louverture, Dessalines, Henry Christophe, and others, indeed. But however, Benito Mussolini made threatening demands. And Haile Selassie, a thing that he has been criticized for, that he was criticized for by Marcus Garvey himself, was that Marcus Garvey said that Emperor Haile Selassie should have prepared for war. He should have prepared for war, knowing that war was coming. But he didn't. Instead, he said, going to the League of Nations and pleading to the European powers to tell Ethiopia to stop. He said, they're all Europeans, all races, and so on. And so the Italians, using mustard gas, which was a war crime, illegally, made Emperor Haile Selassie had to flee with some of his people and took refuge in England, in Bath, etc., and so on. So that's the historical background. But another part of the historical background is this. Remember I said that there were different ethnic groups in Ethiopia. Different ethnic groups in Ethiopia that resented the rule of Emperor Menelik II and also of Emperor Haile Selassie I. The Oromas, there was a faction with the Oromas who were the largest ethnic group. There was the Oromo Liberation Army many decades ago in the last century who fought against Haile Selassie's rule because they said that the Oromas must have their own state. And there were other groups. The Eritreans said that they are not a part of the Ethiopian state and they rejected the rule of Haile Selassie. And so the Eritrean freedom fighting war took place and they won their freedom. Haile Selassie tried his best to have Eritrea because Eritrea has access to the sea, Asmara. You know, I mean, there's a port there in Eritrea because Ethiopia as a state now, it is landlocked. So Eritrea was important in that there's access to the sea. So that was lost. Now, the problem with Ethiopia now is that after Haile Selassie was overthrown in 1974 and murdered, he was actually stifled to death in his palace by Mengistu. After he was murdered, by Mengistu, who unleashed a reign of terror, the dirge, that was the name of his regime, backed by the USSR, the Communist Party who ruled the USSR at the time. Okay. And what happened was that after many years, Mengistu himself, who caused tens of thousands of Ethiopians to be raped, murdered, and tortured, you know, as a dictator, he fled and he was given asylum in Zimbabwe, where he lives today, but he was given asylum by President Mugabe, the late President Mugabe. He was succeeded by the Tigray National Front, that's Menelik Zewane, I believe his name is, yes. And he too, his regime committed atrocities. And then they were succeeded by this new government with a Prime Minister, Ahmed Abiy, who is an Oromo. He's an Oromo belonging from the largest group. But this Prime Minister, he believes that irrespective of national groups, that the people are all Ethiopians and should not be divided along ethnic lines. But there were some other Oromas who are opposed to him and said, no, we are Oromas. We are not Ethiopians. We are Oromas. We must have our own state. So some of them have seen him as a traitor to their cause. But I commend the present Prime Minister, who is an Oromo, and is saying that we should all work together as Ethiopians. There should be no division along ethnic lines. Ethiopia, by the way, has over 80 ethnic groups. Over 80 ethnic groups and over 100 languages. So you see how diverse Ethiopia is in terms of the ethnic groups, over 80 ethnic groups. So the Amaras and the Oromos, Tigrayans, and so on, they are just a few. The Amaras are the second largest group, but under the rule of Emperor Menelik II and Emperor Haile Selassie, the Amaras but the truth must be told, had privileged status and positions. They were the ones who were running things. And of course, this was resented by the other groups. And I just want to say that I want to salute those Oromo soldiers who were crucial, by the way, in the defeat of the Italians at the Battle of Adwa. I have to commend them. What happened presently in terms of the problems is that on Monday night, the 29th of June, 2020, whilst driving his car in Addis Ababa, and that means new flower, it's Amharic, meaning new flower. The most popular Oromo singer, a protest singer, by the name of Achalu Hundessa, was shot dead. He was shot dead while driving in his car Monday night, the 29th of June, 2020. And this unleashed fury from not only Oromos, but other ethnic groups, because this singer, in his lyrics, not only was he speaking and fighting and singing about the right for the Oromos to have self-rule, but that other groups, ethnic groups in Ethiopia, should also have autonomy, self-rule. And some of the Oromo separatists, one of them by the name of Jawar Mohammed, who had been exiled and sentenced to death in his absence and was in the USA. He's 34 years old. He's a media mogul, by the way. He was invited back upon this new government coming to power, because then he was safe. But he felt aggrieved that he should have been given a strong or a prominent position in government. And because he was not given a powerful political position in this present government, he set about to stir up Oromo separatist feelings. And in the demonstrations that he and others were involved with on Tuesday, the 30th of June 2020, what he did, over 100 people died. He was arrested. He's still arrested. And arms from his bodyguards and others were seized, etc. His media station was closed down. And so Ethiopia is in turmoil, ethnic unrest right now. It's on the knife edge. Shashamane, which is 500 acres of land in the land of the Oromos, or Mia, was given not to Rastas. This is important. Shashamane was not given to Rastas. Shashamane, which is 500 acres of land in Oromo land, or Mia, was given by Emperor Haile Selassie I, His Imperial Majesty, to Africans in the Western Hemisphere in gratitude, in thanks for their help in the war in the 1930s to 1941, when he returned to Ethiopia victoriously, in gratitude for their help. So this is something that I have to make crystal clear, because a lot of people have been under the wrong impression that Shashamane is for Rastas. Shashamane is for Africans in the Western Hemisphere. When you read the preamble of the Ethiopian World Federation, which was founded by Emperor Haile Selassie as an organization, Diaspora for Africans in the Western Hemisphere, it shows you that the organization and also Shashamane are not for non-Africans. They are strictly for Africans from the diaspora. Right now, coming to a close of my reasoning, I want to say that there have been a lot of reports of Oromo youths invading Shashamane, destroying property, and attacking some of the residents of Shashamane. Fortunately, I have had no concrete reports about any of the Africans in Shashamane being killed, but I've heard of their properties being burnt and things being stolen from them. I've heard of a hotel called Lily of the Valley, I believe, that has been burnt down. But I am keeping myself posted so that I'll be able, in my capacity as a Pan Africanist journalist, to give reliable and truthful information as time goes on, because it is very dangerous to give wrong information, especially in these perilous times. But what I have to say is that I endorse this as the solution, is that of the over 80 ethnic groups in Ethiopia, speaking over 100 languages, is that representatives, our people in Ethiopia, should come around the table, including the Africans in Shashamane, who came from the diaspora, from the Western Hemisphere, and work out a just solution. Because as Peter Tosh, my favorite whaler, said, there can be no peace and love without equal rights and justice. And the only solution for the current deadly unrest in Ethiopia and for the rest of Africa is for our different African nations speaking different languages to come together and work out just solutions, equal rights and justice for all ethnic groups and individuals, irrespective of gender, irrespective of the size of their ethnic sizes in terms of numbers, because justice must have nothing to do with how large or how small your group is. Every individual, like the nation, is entitled to justice. So I give thanks that today, Sunday, the 12th of July, 2020, that I've been able to give a history of Ethiopia in the past, why things are what they are now, and to offer my solutions to this problem. Because the only way that this problem in Ethiopia can be solved is by all coming together around the conference table and working out. And I'm not saying it's going to be easy. No. And there has to be compromise. But at the end of the day, what must be most important is that the well-being and the progress of the Ethiopians as a people must come first. And as a matter of fact, out of this, we should use this as a template for solving similar problems in other African countries, in our African motherland. And in the words of Marcus Messiah Garvey, one creator, one aim, and one destiny. Unity is strength. A race without authority and power is a race without respect. This is why we have to emancipate ourselves from mental slavery, because none but ourselves can free our minds. So, towards African unity in Ethiopia and the rest of Africa, based on the principle of equal rights and justice for all Africans. Thank you. Asante sana in Kiswahili, that is. Thank you. Asante sana.
Yes, Asante Sana, Brother Mandingo. So, what I'd like to do now is ask Brother Cecil just to make a comment on what he's heard so far pertaining to what Brother Mandingo said. And then after that, I'll open it up for general discussion. So please send your questions and your comments so that we can discuss around it, please. So, Elder Cecil?
Yeah. Our brother Mandingo is, as usual, excellent. He's a good historian. And what he said, because I hadn't got up to the end, it probably into the 20th century, quite dovetailed with my earlier remarks. I don't want to argue with anything that he said. I just want to pick up on one or 2 points. It's first a small one. The Magdala books that were stolen from Ethiopia and landed in the British Museum were definitely not stolen by anybody else. Because what happened is that our brother Seymour levitated the books out of the British Museum, and it was such a miraculous operation that even the British courts couldn't actually see that he'd done anything. He spent a little time inside, but nothing at all in comparison to the value of the actual books involved. So Seymour, who passed some years ago, was a liberation fighter, and that's an act of African liberation in his approach to those books. So that's my first little point. The second one is that our brother didn't mention this, but I think it's important that one of the issues in Ethiopia, and one of the things that we have to give thanks for where Ethiopia is concerned, is that the Ethiopian Christian Church stood as a bulwark against Islam in that territory, and that because of that and other strong elements of Ethiopian culture, Islam, which respects African culture no more than Europeans and European Christianity do, that because that basis of struggle was there, Ethiopia hasn't been swallowed up by Islam in the way that many of the countries in the northern part of our continent has been. So that's the second point I'd like to make. The third point is, don't dispute the number of ethnic groups, which all of the reading says, but I just wonder about the number of languages, and I wonder about the number of languages because of Professor Pra's work on African languages and the extent to which languages that without expertise look different turn out upon proper study to belong together in fundamental ways belong together. And so the number of actual languages in Ethiopia might be considerably less objectively and linguistically than the 100 that we tend to think about. It'd be odd if there were more languages than ethnic groups, because each ethnic group tends to represent a language. So minor point, and it's not really a point of disagreement with our brother Mandingo. The last point is where he ended. And the formula he puts forward is absolutely right. Any people who are objectively being oppressed in any place that they are entitled to struggle for liberation. So eliminating oppression, especially real oppression, not imagined oppression, and there can be imagined oppression, but real oppression has to be eliminated in these situations. And you cannot, as is the case in Ethiopia, have, and Amharic speaking largely, elite oppressing the majority people, the majority ethnic group in any place, and that's actually objectively what was happening, and to some extent is still happening in Ethiopia. I know that dams and electricity and water supply matters, but one of the Oromo objections to what was happening to them was the extent to which a massive dam was being built in the center of their territory and being, without consultation and without proper attention in the first place to the views of the local people. I agree 100% with how Shashamane came into being, and because it was established almost as a fiat, imperial edict in relation to land somewhere in Ethiopia, as it happens in Oromo territory. Oromo people in the surrounding area have, there's enough land, so that hasn't been or wasn't in the first instance the problem, but problems between Shashamane residents and Oromo have arisen in recent years, and I understand, I haven't been there, so I'm not absolutely sure, that a major road, not by the Oromo, but by the government of Ethiopia, was run through Shashamane. So there are issues there, and I agree with our brother that what has to happen is that there needs to be a round table to sort out all of these matters. I agree that the current Prime Minister is Oromo, and given that he starts from within that ethnic group, it's there's been some failure, it seems to me, on his part if the current situation arises, and it did, from the murder of the leading Oromo group, the leading Oromo speaker of their cause and their issue. So Ethiopia is this terribly complex place that we Africans have to understand and get right, and we have to defend it. It's extremely important. Yeah.
I need to clarify.
Hold on, Mandingo. Have you got a TV in the background? You're getting a lot of feedback. Or radio, anything that...
No,
it's not from my daughter.
Okay.
not from me.
All right, carry on.
I just want to say this. In terms of the over 80 ethnic groups, and of course Ethiopia is constituted of the highlands and the lowlands, right? Is that I know I said over 100 languages. How the over 100 languages comes about is that within some of the ethnic groups there are dialects. So that's the qualification. So say for example there are over 80 ethnic groups, there's an ethnic language for each, but within some of the ethnic groups there are some dialects. This is how the figure of over 100 languages as arisen. So I need to, I'm just explaining that. And in terms of religion, Ethiopia, Abyssinia, for many, many centuries, was a place that, as a Christian kingdom from the time of Aksum as a city-state and onwards, as a Christian kingdom, always had to be fighting against Arab Muslim invasions who were accompanied by some Africans who were Muslims. This same situation in West Africa and elsewhere, where we have yes, and elsewhere where we have Africans who are Muslims who join with their Arab Muslim co-religionists and kill and murder Africans who are not who have African religions and spiritualities, or who are Christians, and so on. So there's a case of Gran, the left-handed, who many centuries ago launched a jihad to Islamize Ethiopia, destroy the Christian state of Ethiopia, and he was defeated. Gran.
Yeah.
Remember that name, you know, and so that's always been a serious problem. And this 34-year-old that I'm telling you about, the media mogul who had been sentenced to death in his absence by the Tigrayan regime of Zenawi, and who was invited back by the present prime minister, who's Oromo himself. He's a Muslim, and he has also put his Muslim religion along with the Oromo in front of Ethiopian unity. And what has happened in terms of the Renaissance Dam, that's the name of the dam, that Ethiopian government wants to build, which will result in mass electrification of Ethiopia and so on, and which certain parts of it in Oromo territory, is that it is quite true that it is a matter of respect, that it should not be some decree that, oh, we are going to have this, and there's no consultation with the people in whose territory, that this Renaissance Dam is going to be, a factor in the equation. That's wrong. And what has happened is that the Arab Muslims in Kemet, misnamed Egypt, and we have the current dictator, Cecil, has been funding this media mogul to cause problems, because the Arab Muslim regime in Kemet, misnamed Egypt, and the Arab Muslim regime in the Sudan do not want this Renaissance Dam, because they depend on the water from the Nile. For those who don't know, there are two sources for the Nile. Coming from Rwanda way, Burundi way in Central Africa, through, which is known as the White Nile, and then the Blue Nile, which comes from the highlands of Ethiopia, which is from Lake Tana, T-A-N-A. And Lake Tana is the tributary that has the most amount of water for the Nile. The water from Lake Tana, from the Blue Nile, is much greater than from the White Nile, by the way. And by the way, it's called the White Nile because of the sediments that gives the color of the water and so on. So what has happened is that people can do without food for many, many days, but they cannot do without water. Water is one thing that you need, water to sustain life more than you need food. And Kemet, the Sudan, depends on the water from the Nile. They meet at Khartoum, the Blue and White Nile, because Khartoum means the meeting of the two Niles. That's what it means. You know, the Jeng, the language of the Jeng, J-I-A-N-G. That's the African name. It's not any Dinka. Dinka is some European racist term. It's the Jeng, J-I-A-N. Anyhow, what has happened is that the Arab Muslims in Kemet, misnamed Egypt, and also in the Sudan, have been financing and arming Oromo separatists. So in other words, they are making mischief to get their own agenda because they do not want the Renaissance Dam to be built. So Ethiopians are being played by these external Arab Muslim forces. And this is something that has to be taken into account and has to be dealt with.
Okay. All right. There's a couple of comments here. No, what I want to do as well is actually include some of the comments that's on screen because we don't want just a dialogue between us because there's plenty of people out there who want to contribute. There's a comment here by the brother Kofi Campbell, and I don't know if Mandingo can see it. He said if the central government is so powerful in determining economic outcomes, then groups will fight to control it. So it's basically like what you have said. Various groups will always fight for their interests. And then we have another point here from Azania Jem. They can ask Brother Mandingo to restate what was the year and name of the battle led by the British.
Let me answer that.
Yeah.
At the moment, it's in my subconscious, but not my conscious. I don't remember the exact year that it took place.
It's probably 1879, but don't hold me to it.
But what happened is that I don't remember offhand what the exact year was. But what happened is that the Battle of Magdala, which was the last battle where the fortress where the Emperor Theodosius II was surrounded. And the person who asked the question also asked, well, so how did Ethiopia, why wasn't they colonized then since he was defeated? What happened is that invasion was not for colonization. It was an expeditionary force which was tasked simply to defeat and overthrow Emperor Theodosius II. The intention at that time was not to colonize Ethiopia proper.
I just checked, and Magdala is 1868.
Yes.
Google. Yeah.
Oh, yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I agree with that with those comments. The brother, again, he came in last week who asked about said if the government has the central government has that power of determining things, then if they do it unjustly, the people who are on the receiving end of that decision making will fight, both for their rights in relation to their own territory and also for greater participation in the government.
Which
So
is what
in multi-ethnic states, you do need justice, and you can't they can't survive if some groups or even one big group feels that it's being oppressed or yeah.
Let me say this also. Yesterday I was at the demonstration, the protest by some of us as Africans outside the Ethiopian embassy, opposite Hyde Park at 17 Prince's Gate. And incidentally, next door to the Ethiopian embassy is the Iranian embassy, right? And I was there and I spoke. There was a brother from Ethiopia who interviewed me for the television in Ethiopia and elsewhere and so on. And a brother from Ethiopia who I was speaking with, in talking about some of the ill feeling, he was saying that one of his parents, his mother is Amara, but his father is Oromo. And he said that one of the things that he and others resented was that Amharic, from the time of Emperor Menelik II coming through to Haile Selassie, was the official language.
Yeah.
And they, as Oromas and other ethnic groups, were angry about this, that the Amaras had their language as the official language, which was disrespect to their ethnic languages.
Yes.
And he was very angry. He was speaking to me yesterday at the demonstration about this. I mean, it's a serious thing. He saw this as serious disrespect to his father's Oromo language, and also, people who speak Tigrinya, which is the language of the Tigray people, and other people. So that's a serious thing. And it is a fact that the Amaras monopolize power. And this has caused great resentment, because the other groups...
No, not the Maras. They said the Maras.
No,
Yeah, carry on.
been marginalized.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's what I said. And other ethnic groups have been marginalized, and they are not having it. They are not having it. Serious situation.
Again.
So this thing in terms of official language, because he was saying to me that in the schools, up to now, they are still having Amharic as the official language, and they are not, even in Oromo territory, in the schools, they are not teaching Oromo as a language. Now, you can definitely see that's a recipe for disaster.
Yes. And then there is another problem.
It reminds me of the situation in Azania, South Africa, where our youths rose up in rebellion because they were not going to be forced to speak any Boer language, any Dutch language. They did not know Afrikaans. No European is any African. There's no Afrikaans. That's a lie. They are Dutch. Dutch farmers. The word Boer is a Dutch word meaning farmers. They are Dutch. And our people, our youths in Azania, South Africa, refuse to speak Dutch. That's what they are. They are Dutch. They are no Afrikaans. They are Dutch.
Yes, Brother Cecil, you were saying something?
Yeah, just one small point, and it may be equally important. Those people who get force-fed on the Amharic language then apparently go to university, and university education is apparently in English in Ethiopia. I was quite surprised to hear that, but apparently it's true. In much of the higher education system, the teaching language is English.
Is English?
Yes.
Yes. I mean, yes, it is.
Okay.
And it brings forward the point that Marcus Garvey Jr. said, my physics teacher and brother Pan Africanist, when from in the 1960s, in our party, the African Nationalist Union, which was founded in Kingston 1968, when he's advanced that the lingua franca for the African race, let it be Kiswahili. And he says Kiswahili because Kiswahili transcends the different ethnic groups. Because as Marcus Garvey Jr. correctly said, if you say, let Zulu be the Pan-African language, you will have people saying, oh, the Zulus. If they say Tree, which is the language of the Akan, there's going to be objections. If you say Yoruba, there are going to be objections. If you say Igbo, the same type of thing. But if you say Kiswahili, there is not a group which is a Kiswahili ethnic group. So it's the best choice as a lingua franca, Kiswahili.
Okay. Just to expand on some of the
other languages,
points,
but you just have Kiswahili, which does not belong to any one ethnic group, as a mediator.
Okay. Just to bring up a few of the things that you said, you mentioned Shashamane.
Yes, 500.
And yeah. Now, one of the things I want to ask about Shashamani. What's actually its status? When it was given, was there any kind of autonomy or protection? Exactly what's its status?
The
Because it
state
seems to me that,
what it
as you
was,
say, if the Rovers want their land back, what to stop them from just coming and taking it back?
well, it was a decree of Haile Selassie to say 500 acres for Africans in the Western Hemisphere, as I said earlier, in gratitude for the help of Africans in the Western Hemisphere who helped in the struggle for all Ethiopians, including Oromos. So let's get that straight. The help that Africans in the diaspora rendered to Ethiopia included Oromos.
Yes.
Oromo land is vast.
Yes.
500 acres
Nothing.
is absolutely nothing. In other words,
Mm.
let's face it. I mean, how many people can live on 500 acres? If not even 1/20th of the Africans in the Western Hemisphere would be able to live in 500
No,
acres.
but
It was a get.
yeah,
It was a gesture. No, I'm coming and hold on. I'm coming. So it was a good gesture. So Shashamani was there because of that, and some infrastructure was provided, and they were allowed to build homes and have businesses and so on. But what I'm saying is precisely what I'm saying again. The Oromas and the residents of Shashamani must meet together, these two sides, as Africans, and work out a situation whereby there's amiable relations between the two groups. We need to set an example of African unity. 500 acres is nothing. That's not a problem. But there has to be official negotiations between the two groups, the Africans in Shashamani and the Oromas, to work out relationships. So it means that there will be an official setup that whenever there are any problems, because problems always arise between different peoples, different groups, that they can be resolved. This has to be done. This has to be done. And this goes for example, Africans who go and reside in Ghana and in other countries in Africa, whilst they don't have a place like Shashamani as an area, but we still need to have liaison between our African groups so that there are harmonious relationships. This is important.
okay. No,
Absolutely.
but the point I was trying to tease out, when the land was given, was it with the blessing of the aromas, or was it just?
No. It was
Well, that's the problem,
It was
isn't
a
it?
it was a fear.
absolute king. Absolute king. So it was a decree. And in fact, this is what led to the overthrow of Emperor Haile Selassie I. It was an absolute monarchy. It was not a constitutional monarchy. Because what happened is that Haile Selassie, in seeking to modernize Ethiopia, sent Ethiopian students abroad to Britain and to the USA and elsewhere to study. And I remember coming here in the early 70s as a student, where some of the students at International Students House were from Ethiopia and so on. But the problem that arose was that when these students returned from Britain, returned from the USA, and returned from Canada, they saw that, listen, this cannot go on in Ethiopia, whereby we have for granted in Britain and in France or the USA, we have certain freedoms and so on, but we are living in a place where, quite frankly, it's a dictatorship. And so it's the students, the young students, who started that protest that eventually led to the overthrow of His Imperial Majesty, Emperor Haile Selassie. The very students who he had sent abroad saw how people lived abroad and wanted some of those same civil rights, citizen rights, as what they have experienced abroad as students.
Okay, there's another point here. Just before I bring that up, I know Cecil wanted to say something.
Yes, just very briefly. The size of Shashamane, it's actually the same 500 acres as the University of the West Indies at Mona. It's not particularly large, and also it's the same size as the land that in 1743 the British settled on Queen Nanny to get her out of the war that they just settled with two other treaties in the two previous years. We're not talking about gigantic lands. And the real thing is that at the time that the royal imperial decree was made by the emperor, he didn't see it. The place has developed since, and pressures have arisen from population growth and so on, and urban development within the area. But at the time, it was effectively African bush, and it wasn't seen as a problem.
And that is completely true. It's not like Oromas had to be driven off to make way for Shashamane.
No, absolutely not. No, nobody was displaced. Nobody was displaced.
Some people would call it wasteland. It was just bush. But of course, population had increased over time. And incidentally, this 500 factor is really a factor, because Pinnacle, near Spanish Town in St. Catherine, is about 500 acres too.
There you go. No, we're not talking about big land.
Okay. All right. There's another point here I want to bring up, and it's from Marlene. And the point is, what has language got to do with the singer getting killed? Please simplify things.
Language has nothing to do with the singer getting killed. The singer was an Oromo, and he sang in Oromo. That's what he sang in. But what happened is that other groups identified with his lyrics, because his lyrics, his songs, were about self-rule for the Oromas, and by extension for the other ethnic groups in Ethiopia. And incidentally, information that I gathered from a brother by the name of Geram, who is from Ethiopia, he's Amara, was that what was that Undesa, the brother actually who was murdered, is that he was not for the disintegration of Ethiopia. What he was for is that the Oromas should have self-rule, but he was not saying that the Ethiopian state should be dissolved, that it should disintegrate. He was not for that. And as a matter of fact, and I'm stating what he told me, but I'm going to make my further check on that. But what he said, bear in mind, was that the person who shot the singer to death has been arrested and admitted that he killed him because the singer was not for the disintegration of Ethiopia. That was what I was told by Germa, but I will make further checks to ascertain, all the factors involved.
Okay. There's another point that you brought up, which is very interesting, because that's something I was going to push as well. The whole construction of this Renaissance Dam, and the fact that you're saying it's on Aroma's land, it's in the territory. That's the Aromas, which is good, because I wasn't conscious of that until you said it.
Yes.
Now, obviously, it's been causing great controversy with especially Egypt. especially Egypt, who claims that in 1921 the British gave them sovereignty over all the Nile,
Which is
over
absolutely ridiculous.
all the waters of the Nile. So
Ridiculous.
that's the point. You did touch on it.
Well, let me come
You
in on
did,
that
no,
straightly.
hold on. They did touch on it. I just finished the point. They did touch on it because I've heard rumors. I don't know how true they are. That what's happening in Ethiopia in terms of the unrest, there's probably a hidden hand of Egypt behind it.
Well,
Because
hold on.
obviously it would be in their interests for that dumb project to be delayed or sabotage or whatever happens to it.
Let me answer straight away.
Hmm.
I didn't touch on it. I said that Cecil, the Arab Muslim, and others, that this media mogul guy, that they have been financing him and other Romans and arming them because they do not want the Renaissance Dam to be built. That's what I said categorically. This is what is happening. And so they are using those aromas who they can use to stop the building of the dam. They do not want the dam to be built. And the
Okay.
British, the only so-called water that the British can talk about giving permission is the Thames. The Nile is in my motherland. The Nile belongs to us. It shows
Hmm.
the insolence of these British about giving permission in other people's country. The Nile belongs, the happy, because the creator did for the Nile, the happy API, belongs to us as Africans. No non-African can tell us what to do with our rivers, be they the Nile, the Congo, the Zambezi, whatever. It's ours. And so
Okay.
let us remember that the Arabs, these same Arab Muslims, whilst at times they were in conflict with the European Christians, that there were stages in history whereby the Arab Muslims were junior partners with the European Christians in enslaving and murdering our African people.
Yeah.
Let us never.
Okay. Now,
Yeah.
just a small point what you said. You're saying about trying to prevent it being built. From
Yes.
my understanding, it's been completed, and now they're talking about the rate at which it is filled. So that's, well, I was watching a program yesterday about it. It's actually more or less completed.
No,
So now they just, now the dam is now completed more or less. Now they're just talking about filling it. That's where the discussions around filling it, how long it should take, and so forth.
no, what I'm saying is this. When it was first mooted to build the dam, the Arab Muslims in Kemet and in the Sudan were doing everything to stop it from being built. So it has been
Yeah.
built over years under constant sabotage. And what has happened is that with it being filled now, this is where it comes into the situation where the waters are going to be diverted coming from Lake Tana to be used in that dam. And what the Ethiopian government has said is that water that we will take from Lake Tana is not going to prevent water from going to the Sudan and to Kemet. Water will still be there. In other words, the Renaissance Dam is not going to take all of the water coming from Lake Tana. But the thing about it, the real reason why the Arab Muslims don't want the dam is that mass electrification, which the dam will bring about, will transform Ethiopia into an economic giant. And they do not want a powerful Ethiopian state to exist. and especially one which is not Muslim, one that they have been trying for centuries to Islamize, and so on. And so, like their predecessors, they have been at work to try to wreck Ethiopia. And this is what we must work to prevent them from achieving this objective.
Yes. I subscribe to most of that, but I think it's important also that these things are always complex, and one element of the complexity has just been summarized by our brother Mandingo. But that dam sits in the center. Don't hold me to the complete geography, but it sits on a large patch of Oromo land. And we know that the Oromo had objections to it about how people who were on that land were going to be forcibly relocated and all of that stuff. So it was at the center, and actually remains at the center of, no doubt that the whole of Ethiopia will benefit from the electrification which will flow from it. But there are local problems about, it's not just there. The China built a gigantic dam called the Three Gorges Dam. And when you do that, you occupy land that people previously were on. So it's always difficult. And if you don't consult properly and don't deal with the people, the ethnic group, that whose land you're taking over and having to transfer, is going to cause problems. And it did and has and continues to cause problems in Ethiopia, and between the Oromo and the government of Ethiopia.
And that is precisely true, because it was done in an arrogant way. As we have a saying in Jamaica, it's not what you do, it's how you do it. And this is why there should have been respectful negotiations between both parties. It's in the land of the Oromos, and the Oromos had every right to be consulted and for them to agree to what they were willing to agree with. I totally endorse that, because when you disrespect people in their own land, which it is literally, these are the problems that have come about. But we are where we are now, and we have to work out and resolve the situation, because we see the negative, the destructive forces that have been unleashed because of the way the construction of this dam went about. It was done in a way of not consulting and getting the agreement of the Oromo people. And I am sure that if the Oromos had been treated respectfully, that they would have put forward their own ideas as to where and how, etc. But this was not done. And there is absolutely no excuse for this form of disrespect. And we see the trouble that has resulted. Because
it involved, with respect, my brother, more than just disrespect, because insofar as that there was and is a moral resistance, until this recent Ethiopian government came into power, the Ethiopian government was being extremely brutally oppressive, suppressive to the Oromo resistance to this dam and to other elements of moral resistance. So there is the practical thing around the dam, the lack of consultation in the first place, the disrespect that involved, but also what it stirred up has been extremely brutal. We're talking about killings of whole heap of people in Oromo land by the government of Ethiopia in recent years.
That's the Tigray ethnic group who were there before in killing Oromos. Yes, because they killed a lot of, as a matter of fact, the demonstrators who were outside, and I was with them yesterday demonstrating outside the Ethiopian embassy. And by the way, a letter was handed in, stating what we were protesting, is that this same group had protested in the past about the mass killing of Oromos by the Tigrinian regime before.
Yes.
by the
Yeah,
Tigrayan regime before. And this is one of the things that this guy, the media mogul, his name is Mohammed Jawar Mohammed, who was being paid by Cecil, the Arab Muslim dictator in Kemet, and so on. He's being criticized rightfully by some Oromos to say, imagine, you know that Oromos were murdered. Oromos were murdered in their thousands by the regime before. And you should not allow foreigners to be using you to create problems for more Oromos to die, etc. And things should be worked out in a just manner. And you know, so not all Oromos are in support of what he's doing.
Okay.
And let's remember, you know, this guy who is 34 years old, he had to flee for his life. He was sentenced to death by the Tigrayan regime before, that was there before. He was only able to return to the country because he was invited back by the present prime minister, who is Oromo himself. And because he was not given some position that he thought he should have had, he has been stirring up and making a lot of trouble.
Yes. Well, Taharkah, are there any other questions coming from the viewers?
No, there's nothing more. There's only one option about solutions. What do we think the solutions are? But
the solutions
I'm seeing something from Alima. I'm seeing something from a sister by the name of Alima. And where she's saying at 7:22, she said, we Africans should not allow religion to separate us wherever we are.
Yes. I did post it in the
that. Yes.
I did post it in the thing.
Who is a sister? Because, you know, for us to have a family, it takes the male and the female. And Alima, our sister, is saying, we Africans should not allow religion to separate us wherever we are. And I remember Malcolm X saying that when we get together, we must put our religions in the closet and come together as Africans.
Yes, and Marcus Garvey's organization practiced that too, very seriously.
Secular, no religious dimension.
Yeah, and just to say, the organization behind this broadcast, the PACM, that's all. That's also the philosophy. As long as you're an African, that's all we see.
Yeah. Although it's rightly celebrating African traditional religion, the PACM.
Yes.
And
rightly so. We do not allow ourselves to be divided along religious lines.
Yes, and especially external religions, which Islam is and Europe is, and both of those religions, regardless as not people of the book, as culturally inferior, and all kinds of powerfully negative effects flow from that approach to us.
As a matter of fact, as Dr. Yosef Ben Yochan and my elder and friend and others, Marcus Garvey Jr. and have said, Islam, Christianity, Judaism, etc., are not African religions. They are foreign religions. People have the right to practice whatever religion that they want. But we as Africans have the right and reserve the right that no non-African has any right to impose their religion or religions on us.
Okay.
Absolutely. And we as Africans must exercise our right to practice our religions and our spiritualities. A thing that I have noticed with African spiritualities and religions is that you notice it does not seek to convert and evangelize with other people. You do what you want to do, leave me to do what I want to do. As long as I'm not interfering with you. The way in which I want to see the Creator and worship, that's my choice. And same with your concern.
Yeah.
Now,
Just one
there's one.
small,
All right, go on,
just
Cecil. Then there's one point.
one small point in connection with that. Even though we don't evangelize, when Westerners get access to African religion, as for example is the case in Santeria in the West, they
Yeah.
actually adopt it in droves. Yeah, people don't know, but it happens. That happens to be true.
They
Enough. They adopt when they get access to African religion, as for example is the case with Cuban Santeria.
Yes.
Whites adopt it in droves and practice it.
Yes.
Now, there's one more point, sir, because we're coming up to our time. But unlike with other countries in Africa that were borders were determined by the Europeans, Ethiopia, as we are told, was the only country that wasn't subjugated in that kind of way. So my question is, Ethiopia as an entity, when did it come into being? Because the problems that we're having now, when I think back of Ethiopia, we talk about Ethiopia going back to the days of Abyssinia. Was it always a amalgamation of different groups that made up that territory?
Let
Or
me
is it something that
Our brother,
made
our
up
brother dealt with
Ethiopia?
let
Or
me
is
Our
it
brother dealt
something
with
that
that.
came about relatively recently?
let me explain.
Our brother dealt with that,
I
and
did
you should just repeat what he said. Yes.
I did.
Okay, I'm just amplifying it for
Yeah.
people who
Yeah.
are listening
Yeah.
in
Yeah. Let
or the
me
viewers.
yes. Let me just repeat what I had said earlier at the start in giving the historical perspective.
Mhm.
I'm saying that thousands of years ago, we had a state in that area of Africa. There was a city-state of Aksum, AKSUM, the city-state,
Mhm.
and out of that, there were other states also, but Aksum is well known. Then later on, we have in the Abyssinia, whereby Addis Ababa was not the capital. I mean, you have had a region in it called Shore. There were various kingdoms and so on. But over time, what happened is that different states in that region were combined due to military invasions, internal and so on. And that was why I said Emperor Menelik II, under his rule, he conquered other parts, other states, and the lands of other ethnic groups and made Ethiopia the largest in terms of geographical size than any other Ethiopia before. And what we are witnessing now is that the largest size that Emperor Menelik II expanded the empire to become has now decreased with the loss, for example, of Eritrea. Separate forces like in Oromo land who are seeking to be a state of their own. So this is why Ethiopia is in a state where that if there is not constructive, if there are not constructive negotiations and so on, Ethiopia will disintegrate as a multi-nation state. It has lost Ethiopia, it has lost Eritrea, and there are other places because once others start to leave, it's a domino effect. And so it is very crucial, and this is why I say all the groups in Ethiopia, the 80 other groups in Ethiopia, have to come around the conference table. And the Amaras are not superior. Those who think that they are superior have to get real and realize that the other groups are not putting up with any Amara domination and so on. All groups must have equal rights. And that is why I said equal rights and justice is the only way out, the only resolution to this problem. And that this will serve as an example to similar problems that exist in the rest of Africa, because they do. Yes,
Mhm.
May I just say that I agree with all of that, excepting for the notion we have to be careful with, that Ethiopia was at its biggest under Menelik the second. We need to remember, and I said this in my introductory remarks, which you may not have heard, that in the destruction of black civilization, there's a map which shows Ethiopia as including Kemet and what we now call Ethiopia. That's one. The notion Ethiopia historically also refers to the whole of Africa, and then in some of the literature there is talk about the whole of Africa as thither Ethiopia, and then India, ancient Hindustan, as hither Ethiopia. And so this is in historic conception, a very vast entity that we Africans have, even though it's no longer the reality, that culture history there, we have to know and understand.
In terms of that, in terms of destruction of black civilization, which is one of my African Bibles, there is a chapter in it whereby it shows that Kemet, misnamed Egypt, is actually the daughter of Ethiopia. That Ethiopia is up the Nile and coming down through to the Sudan, then coming through to Kemet, which ends up in the Mediterranean, also known as the Great Sea. What I'm saying is that you have had various states and so on, and I know about the situation in India and the Indus, from which we get India, etc., and so on. But what I'm talking about in terms of one de facto empire with one ruler, so to speak. That's what I'm talking about with respect specifically to Emperor Menelik II in modern times.
I agree with you that was the largest modern Ethiopian empire.
Precisely. Because it will take another discussion, which I'm quite willing to deal with, in terms of that.
Those other grander historical meaning. Yes.
In terms of antiquity. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Well, our time is coming to a close. But just before, there's one more point, just for point of clarification, because I know there's several people listening and making points. So I think just for point of clarification again, the word Ethiopia, because as you say, it was Menelik that brought these different territories together through conquest and so forth to make that region, that border, what we know as Ethiopia. So when it was smaller states, like you say, Aksum and different states, was the word Ethiopia being used at that time then?
The word Ethiopia is coming from the Greek, meaning the land of the burned faces, and it referred to the entire continent of Africa.
Right.
So Ethiopia is simply another word for the entire continent of Africa. And what has happened is this: is that we have the situation whereby what we call Ethiopia, you notice sometimes I call it Abyssinia, and I gave the example earlier that we have two Jamaican music groups from in the 60s. One called themselves the Ethiopians, the other called themselves the Abyssinians. With respect to the multi-nation state of that place in the Horn of Africa, which is Northeast Africa. So when we're talking about Ethiopia, we have to make a distinction for Ethiopia, meaning the whole continent of Africa, an alternative name, and the state of Ethiopia in modern times, whereby Abyssinia officially change their name from Abyssinia to be declared as the state of Ethiopia. But the
Ethiopia.
word Ethiopia has been around, coming from the Greek, the land of the burnt faces, for the
Mhm.
entire continent of Africa.
Okay,
With us being called
and
Ethiopia.
just for another quick point. So
Yes.
when did that change take place?
It took place in the it took place in the last century, because up to in the war with the Italians, with
Yes.
Mussolini,
Even
and
before Abyssinia.
the word Abyssinia was also
Mhm.
used along with the word Ethiopia for the same state.
Yes.
But
Mhm.
what can be said is that after the Italian were defeated in 1941, after, then it was definitively just Ethiopia all along. Whereas before, there were those who used the term Abyssinia and so on.
Interchange.
They no longer use that. After that, it was just Ethiopia. So that,
Okay.
and by the way, that Abyssinia is coming from a Amharic word, Abesha.
Abesh.
Abesha, Habesha, and it literally means, and I was told this by a brother of mine who was an Amara. We met in Trinidad at St. Augustine in the late 70s, by the name of Terife Belehu, who said that Abesha means neighbor. Neighbor, brother, because we're brothers, you know.
Mhm.
Yeah, you know, I'd asked him and he told me that. And I want to remember also another brother from Ethiopia who was at the Mona campus in the late 70s in
Mhm.
Jamaica by the name of Terife, not Terife Belehu, that's the Amara brother at St. Augustine in Trinidad. In Mona, Bantirgo Miriam, who one of his parents was Oromo and one was Amara.
Okay.
Yeah, I just want
Now,
to, yeah.
almost entirely at the time, but there's one more point before um, we have to close,
Mm-hmm.
and that is, as we can see the title, the unrest in Ethiopia, and you can say
Yes,
now the Aromas and different groups are now
yes,
seeking.
yeah.
So my thing, if Ethiopia was to break up, how do you think that would affect the rest of Africa, and how do you think that would affect also Africans in the diaspora
I,
because of
mm,
the position that is held in?
it would it we must ensure that Ethiopia is not broken up, because the only people who will benefit from the breaking up of Ethiopia will be the enemies of the African race, because
Yes.
Ethiopia signifies historically resistance against foreign invaders. In spite of the problems we have had internally and so on, Ethiopia signifies that. So psychologically, it would be a mortal blow to the African psyche at home and abroad. And it would also further the interests of our enemies in disintegrating other countries in Africa who they want to subdivide even further. No, we have no choice. It is unity or death. There's no in between. We we
I
as
agree
Africans
with that.
in the diaspora and elsewhere, we must continue to engage. And for those of you who have not been engaged, must get engaged in this process, because what affects Ethiopia affects not just Ethiopia, but Africans outside of Ethiopia, in Africa, and in the African diaspora.
Okay, and also, Brother Cecil, from you, how do you see that situation?
No, I agree with the remarks that our brother has made. I don't Ethiopia's come under pressure before, and I don't expect it to break up. I expect the people of Ethiopia, the ethnic groups of Ethiopia, to sit down together and reason together and solve the problem. And I think now that the Oromo have come to the fore, the fact that they're the largest ethnic group actually has meaning in terms of the power dynamics in that place, and I expect benefits for the whole of Ethiopia to arise from the fact that the largest ethnic group is not being downtrodden by a minority ethnic group. So I think that what's happening now, not the bloody bit of it, but the reallocation of power is a good development, and that it will contribute to saving Ethiopia.
Okay, well, that's a good point, and we are completely out of time.
No, let me
So,
just say this. Is that it is a duty, you know, as the person who made the presentation for today's discussion. My final on this before you close, Taharkah, is that it is the duty of the Oromos specifically to ensure and lead by example in showing that they can reconcile with the Amaras and other ethnic groups to have a union, a harmonious union and a progressive union for all Ethiopians in Ethiopia. Such an example will be a beacon and a positive direction for Africans at home and abroad. Asante, sir.
Okay.
Asante, sir.
Yeah, again, I'd like to thank for all those viewers who tuned in to another of PSCM Mimosa sessions. And just to say, remember, the month of August is quickly upon us. And in August, of course, we dedicate that month to the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey. So throughout that month, we'll be having lectures specifically based around the life and times of Garvey and his influence and so forth. That's something that PSCM does each year. And what I would like to say as well, I know there's a lot of people that tune in each week and would like to be in a position to take part in some of these discussions. Because I know, yes, you can send your questions in and you can send your comments in, but it's also good sometime to be actually that I can bring you up in the studio that you could participate within the actual live discussions. So if that is the case and you would like to do that, please, I'm going to give out an email that you can contact, let me know, and then I can get in touch with you and we can take it from there. So I'm going to put an email on screen now, and that's the PSCM email. So please contact us because we are always on the look for presenters, for people with interesting things, as long as it's around Africa, as long as it's around Pan Africanism. In other words, as long as it's to do with us and in our interests and something about us, that's something that we'd be interested to have on this show, on this platform. Now, the PSCM sessions take place on a Sunday between 6 and 8. But outside of the PSCM session, what we want to do now is actually build the platform. There's another 6 days of the week. So again, if anybody's interested, we are looking to cover all issues pertaining to African people. So it could be somebody's interested in talking about food, African fashion, African music, whatsoever. We can give a dedicated spot to that outside of the PSCM session. That's something that we're trying to build the channel. So and we want people to get on board. So again, just send me an email to send me a, email me on that email, and then I'll get in touch with you and the discussion can take place. So again, I'd like to thank Brother Mandingo for his excellent presentation and to bring in the awareness as to what's happening right now in Ethiopia. As he said, Ethiopia is a place that you can see the reaction when Mussolini invaded in 1935. Africans throughout the world did not hesitate to rise up, make their way to Ethiopia to fight. So it holds a sacred place in the hearts of all African people and something that acts as a beacon for us. It'll be a shame to see it disintegrate. As Mandingo said, it's time to sit around the table and let's solve the problems. And that's something that I'm sure that will be done because there have been many, many attempts. If you can withstand invasions from the Arabs for how many, going on how long, the Christians, the Europeans, and so forth, and you still kept your integrity, the rest of Africa, I'm sure, is looking to you, as they always done. So again, from me, from the PSCM, we would encourage that dialogue, and we would like to see the situation in Ethiopia improve for the better, because a strong Ethiopia is a strong Africa, and that's how we see it. Africans at the diaspora, when you think of Africa, when Garvey visited Jamaica, look at the reception. I mean, Selassie, look at the reception that he got. So it shows that Ethiopia is something that Africans around the world is looking to. We're looking to Ethiopia for leadership. And I think a strong Ethiopia means a strong Africa. And that's something that I'm sure the problems there will be solved and Ethiopia will continue to be the guiding star of Africa. So again, I'd like to thank Brother Elder Cecil, thank Mandingo, and we will be back again next week at 6 o'clock with another dynamic discussion. So please tune in again at 6. So until then, I would say, I forgot it. Mandingo would correct
Thank you,
me.
Father.
How do you say goodbye in Amharic?
Um, Wadada is love, and I'm trying to remember what Wadada will do in terms of
Yeah.
love. Yeah.
Wadada, and remember, it's just one of the many languages. It's just that the one that, because of whatever reason, we are familiar with.
Mhm.
So I would say Wadada, and I would also say Kwahiri
Yes.
until next week. Bye.
Garvey.